You and I, when we talked last year in Texas, and I did note that even in Iowa, when the media was speaking to Republicans who were voting in that primary, they were asking, you know, what's the big issue here in Iowa? And I guess this will be repeated in New Hampshire. And to a person, they said the border. Now, you know better than anyone that border is leaking like a sieve. It is a national disgrace. The border issue alone could get Donald Trump back into the White House in 2024, couldn't it?
That's absolutely correct, especially when you're talking to folks who live in the southern part of the United States, like Texas. They are all voting for Trump because of that reason. Back home in Texas, all my neighbors, they're kind of like independent voters, moderate types. Most of them voted for Joe Biden in the last election. They have all said no more, and it's because of that border issue. And I have to tell you, Steve, even up north, here in New Hampshire, down in Boston, where I have a lot of family, the immigration issue is starting to become a big deal as well, because you have Governor Greg Abbott down in Texas bussing up thousands of migrants to these other northern, more blue states that didn't really have to deal with this problem firsthand. And now they are realizing the consequences of a wide open border. So you're absolutely right. The border really could be the #1 issue in this election. And if it is, that is very bad news for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Kristen, the busing issue is really interesting. I mean, we had a border issue earlier in the 2020s. We stopped people from coming to Australia by relocating them to a place called Nauru, an island out in the Pacific. I can't imagine what the outcry would have been if instead we'd let these people land in Western Australia and suddenly bus them across the country and drop them in the streets of Canberra. It's just extraordinary that that's happening in your country.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant move by Governor Greg Abbott. And I find it quite humorous, Steve, when Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, starts complaining and wailing over a few thousand illegal immigrants being bused to his city, the biggest city in the United States. When down in Houston, where I live, I mean, not just thousands, we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants. And it really has changed the way of the lives of the American people who live down there. Try going to an emergency room in Houston, Texas. Try sending your child to a public school. Everything about life in Texas cities has been changed by this crisis. So it's about time that these coastal elites have to deal with the problem that their voting habits have created. That is the only way that this problem is going to get solved.
Were you surprised, Kristen, when DeSantis pulled the pin? I mean, he'd spent tens of millions of dollars in Iowa alone trying to get his numbers up. I guess he had no path, as he said, to victory. But were you surprised he pulled out so quickly?
No, and I'm glad that he did at this point. When he entered the race about a year ago, Steve, he was at 35%. He hadn't even announced he was running yet, and he was not far behind Trump in the polls. What happened, though, was that the indictments really rallied support around Trump. In March, when that first indictment came, you immediately saw this bump for Trump. He bumped by like 10 points in the polls, while DeSantis saw his support dwindle by 5 points. So what has happened here is that a lot of Republicans, they love DeSantis. They think his policies are great, but they have said we have to support Donald Trump, because to not support Donald Trump is to tell Democrats that they can get away with subverting our justice system to take out their primary political opponent. And we will not let that stand.
Always a pleasure to catch up with you. That's Sky News contributor Kristen Tate.
Thank you very much, Steve. Always a pleasure.